What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Angel Road Outdoors, the podcast. This week is a special one. It's episode 10, and for anybody that knows me on a personal level, the number 10 is very special to me, dear to my heart. Number 10 was my hockey number for so many years growing up as a troubled youth, not necessarily troubled. But I was definitely number 10 while I played hockey growing up. And I have passed that on to my son, who is also number 10. And the fact that episode 10 of Angel Road Outdoors, the podcast, finds me speaking alone to a microphone in my basement, looking at a 162-inch deer skull antlers that I shot in Illinois. And to tell the story about that is pretty fucking exciting. So I am going to get into the story tonight of how I located this deer, how I hunted this deer, and how I was able to shoot this deer. And it is the unquestionably biggest deer of my life. And it was the most amazing thing to walk up upon this deer and see it. And so I will start the story. You know, there was a point in time where I was able to utilize some creativity and name these big bucks that we would find. And I don't know why, I just lost interest in doing that. It was cool for a while. I really got a kick out of it, but I stopped naming bucks. And so this buck has no name other than the Illinois Giant. I mean, that's just what I referred to him as because he is, in my opinion, an Illinois Giant. And so if you hear me and you're listening to this and you're like, Bret, why didn't you name him something creative? I just stopped doing it. I stopped naming these bucks, not for any other reason than it just became cumbersome. And then I would never see them and I would never shoot them. And it seemed to me to be a waste of time. And I think I'm okay with that. I don't wish that I would have given this buck a name. The Illinois Giant is good enough for me until I find another Illinois Giant in my future. And then we'll have hunted 2 Illinois Giants. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Not if, when. So my journey to this buck started last year in 2022. I work for a national restaurant chain here in America. I live in Michigan and I have a territory. I'm a regional construction manager for a national restaurant company and I have a territory. And that territory is Michigan, the bend of the northern part of Indiana, all of Illinois, Wisconsin, and it used to be Minnesota as well. And so I drive to all of my job sites. And so I periodically will have to go to a job site and just inspect the construction. For the most part, that is done from where I'm sitting right now at my desk. I review reports and I look at pictures and I discuss things with contractors. But I do have to travel and I do have to go to jobs. And typically my busiest time of year is from September 1st to December 31st of a calendar year as we try to cram in as many new restaurant openings as possible to appease Wall Street. It is the most miserable part of my job, but I decided last year that I'm going to start hunting out of state. And it wasn't because I wasn't happy with the bucks that I was seeing here in Michigan, because we're fortunate to have a tremendous property where we can find good deer. Some of the biggest bucks you can shoot in Michigan are found in the county that we can hunt in. And so that is not it. It's just I wanted to hunt more. And so I decided last year that I was going to go to Kansas. And I went to fucking Kansas and I found deer and I didn't kill one. But I still did it. I also decided that since I'm in Illinois constantly, why not just get an Illinois tag and find some state land and hunt in Illinois? And I also said the same thing about Wisconsin. And I bought a Wisconsin tag and I never hunted there. But I did hunt in Illinois last year. And I had a project. I still have the project. It's still under construction. It was supposed to start last year, but it didn't. And so I had actually sought out some state land in and around this particular city in Illinois. And I did all types of e-scouting. I downloaded onX, and I got a mobile stand last year, and I listened to podcasts, and I figured out how to read terrain features, because this land, where this state land is located in Illinois, is unlike anything that I'm familiar with in Michigan. I am a born and raised flatland ag hunter. Like, that's all I knew. I started hunting when I was 21. We hunted up north Michigan, which is vast and desolate and sad and lonely, and never shot a deer. And then I moved to Florida, and I didn't hunt at all. And then I came back to Michigan, and my buddies had procured this incredible hunting property, this 80 acres down in Hillsdale, and it's beautiful, and there's very slight elevation changes, but it is big ag country down there. And so that's all I knew. And so I had to learn how to hunt different types of terrain, very specifically dramatic elevation changes as it relates to agriculture and big timber and drainages and draws and so on and so forth, and winds and thermals, and I had to figure all that stuff out. And so I found this particular state land in 2022 and decided that I would hunt it when I would go to Illinois during hunting season, archery season. And I sat one day at the end of November and found some great sign, but I also found some hunter sign. And so, whatever, I hunted that afternoon and didn't see anything at all. And then came back in December after my big push for restaurant openings was done, and was able to scout, find a tree, and shoot a nice little 8-point on my first day there, which is ridiculous to say, especially when you're about to hear what I'm going to tell you later in this episode. And so that particular day, I got up at like 2 a.m, and I drove out to Illinois, and it was butt-ass cold, and there was supposed to be this really ridiculous cold front coming where the temperatures were going to drop down into the single digits, and then there was a blizzard coming, and I was trying to squeeze in this hunt, and I thought, man, these deer are certainly going to be moving. So anyway, my first day, I scout, blow up the woods, go to the other part of this particular park for the afternoon hunt, and like 10 minutes into my sit, the neighbors must have come home and bumped a buck out of their yard, and he ran right into me at like 12 yards, and I blasted him. And I, like I said, I was done hunting in my first day. I sat in my tree stand annoyed because I was sweaty, and I wasn't really hunting where I wanted to hunt in the particular part of the state land. And then I heard these people come home, and I heard them shovel, and I was sitting there like head in hand, discouraged, tired. And then a fucking deer runs into me in 10 minutes, and I shoot him, and my season's over in Illinois. So whatever. It was wonderful. I have a YouTube video that I put together on that. You can go watch that if you feel like it. So I said to myself, well, if there's a deer here in late December, surely there's a deer here earlier in the season as well. And I'm going to be working in Illinois in 2023, so why not continue to hunt this particular area? But I want to dive deeper into it. I want to figure this out. And so the longer that I e-scouted, the more I realized where I really needed to be to get on some deer. And that was going to involve some very difficult boots on the ground scouting, which I did earlier in the year, and ultimately determined there was no way I was going to get to where I wanted to go safely, efficiently, effectively, and yet still kill a deer and be able to get the fucking deer out of there if I ever shot one, because it was so far back. And these elevation changes are 100, 200 feet, and they're very sharp. It's not gradual. It's not like these rolling hills elsewhere. It was very dramatic. And so I also told myself this year that I was going to start getting permission to hunt people's property, permission to access certain areas through private property. And so I did. I mailed out a whole bunch of letters in the beginning of the season, and one of them included a farmer whose property abutted the very back corner of this state land. Because I said to myself, if there are a bunch of people hunting this state land, they're going to push those deer to the very back. And I can't get to the very back unless someone allows me to walk through their yard to get there. And lo and behold, maybe it was my birthday. It was like March. I mean, it was early. And I get a phone call, and the extension is from the town closest to where my construction project was going to be and this particular state land. And so I answered, which I typically don't do. I typically will not answer an unknown number. But because this was, I knew I had mailed out certain letters and I knew I had work sort of in the area, I answered. And it was a woman. And she said, "Hi, Bret. I received your letter about hunting permission, and I wanted to say yes." And I said, "I'm sorry. Can you remind me? Because I don't remember everybody's names or whatever that I had sent letters to." And she said, "You actually sent a letter to my father, who owns the land, but I am the executor of his estate because he is old and requires care. And so I got your letter, and it was so nicely written that I thought it was not real. And then I took a minute and read it thoroughly and realized, oh, this person really is serious." And she's like, "I appreciate that. And you're the first person to ask this year. So yeah, you can have permission to access the state land through the farm." And so what this did was it gave me almost like a private parking spot, like 3/4 of a mile, half a mile from where I really wanted to hunt. And it was humongous. I mean, it was such a tremendous thing to say, like, hey, I put in the work, I figured out where I wanted to go. I got cards from my neighbor whose wife, who's had passed, created these greeting cards. I figured out these people's mailing addresses. I hand wrote these letters, and it friggin' worked, man. Like, it's just a matter of, are you willing to put in that little bit of extra effort that most people aren't willing to put in? And it's not always going to pay off, but it truly paid off this year. And so this wonderful lady provided me access to get to the back of the state land through her father's farm. And she said, you can access, you can park wherever you want. You can park at the house and walk out there. You can park along the street and walk out there. Whatever you want to do, just give me a heads up. And so I did. And so I think the very next time was a few weeks later. I was in Illinois. It was still, it hadn't greened up or anything yet. It was still gray and brown. And in fact, it started snowing the first time I ever went out there. And I arrived, I parked, I walked out to the park. I was doing some boots on the ground scouting, and found myself way out there. And you know what? I found some sheds. I think I found 3 or 4 sheds that first day. And I knew it was going to snow, and I wanted to get out there and look around before the snow arrived. But it was too late. So I think I only got 15 minutes of unencumbered boots on the ground scouting at the back of this park before the actual snow started. And so I was covered in snow and everything was soaking wet. So I started to make my way back to the car so I could go finish my drive to the hotel. And on my way back, I walked by this little island of trees on the farm. And as I was standing there, I could see a trail camera on the edge of the trees. And I didn't think much of it. I thought, well, surely someone, the farmer's grandson or somebody sits in that little island and just shoots at deer during gun season. And as I was standing there, I looked down into the 1.5 inches of snow, and I could see what appeared to be tines sticking out. And I walked over and I reached down, and sure as shit, I found the biggest antler shed I've ever found in my life, like fresh. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm on my way back to the truck. There's 1.5 inches of snow on the ground, and I happened to be standing there in the middle of just this farm by these trees, and I'm literally standing on top of an antler shed. That's wild to me. And so I walked around that whole island. I looked in, I looked around, and again, it's snowing balls out, and I'm covered in snow. My backpack's covered in snow, soaking wet, freezing cold. My glasses are fogging up, and I'm carrying around this massive antler shed. And I'm like, that's so bizarre that I can't find the matching pair or the matching side. But whatever, I'm going to go back to where I found it and just kind of kick around in the snow. And so I went back to where I found the first one, and I just started kicking my foot back and forth, and I found the other side. It was right next to it, but it was turned upside down, so no tines were sticking up. So I found a matching set of antlers of the biggest deer I've ever found in my life the first time I ever stepped foot on this lady's farm. Now I was pumped up. I found two good sets. I found another good set of sheds back there that were pretty chewed up, maybe even from the year before. And then I found this really big set, and I was absolutely ecstatic because it was way bigger than the deer I had shot the year before. And so I'm like, man, my theory was right. The bigger deer are definitely in this back corner. But here's the problem. This buck's antlers dropped on private property. So it wasn't a total slam dunk, so to speak, as far as my ability to get on this buck. However, if he's here, the chances are good he's not hanging out in this little island of trees or just hanging out in this grass. He's over here on this neighbor's property, and then he's coming to bed here periodically probably and eating the ag, and then he probably works his way out into the back of this state land and yada, 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 yada. There was a lot of pieces of the puzzle I hadn't put together yet, but I was very, very excited. And this is March of 2023. So, I'm 7 months away from hunting season already. And so I knew for a fact that this was going to be, if I could find this buck, this was going to be my number one target for 2023. And so I left and I went on my merry way to work. And I don't remember if I put trail cameras up at that point or not. Probably not. Or maybe I did, but whatever. It's neither here nor there. And I did. I for sure did, because I put them by where I found the other set of antlers, and I was getting a lot of deer traffic, but it was too far away for me to see what they were. So anyway, I think I put up one trail camera that time, and I came back a few weeks later, ended up finding 2 or 3 more good sheds from this particular property. In fact, one of them, I believe, is not it's not the one that I shot this year, but it is a buck that I believe I had on trail camera again this year. There ended up being 3 really big 140 plus class bucks in this particular spot this year. Anyway, so again, this is March, early April that I have found sheds. I've started to put out a lot more trail cameras. You can see a lot of the worn deer trails at that time of year, which is what everybody says. And so I'm not saying anything groundbreaking, but it's true. Very unfamiliar land. You can see the tracks. You can see where they're crossing low points in the barbed wire fence from the private to the public. You can see hair. You can see licking branches. You can see all the most heavily used runs at that time of year. And I used that to drop pins into my Onyx to kind of base my future scouting endeavors off of. And one of them paid off insanely well. It was a low point in the barbed wire fence, the entrance to a drainage from the ag field, and it had the largest tracks in it of all the areas I saw while I was out there. And I put a camera up there, and I left it up there all spring and even into early summer until the batteries died. And the buck that I was after was on this camera all spring and summer. All spring and summer. And I think he was probably there the day that I shot him, and we'll get into that. But this was his entrance and exit to and from private into public primarily. That is just my opinion. I think he could have walked the edge of the ag and jumped in here, but this was where he went. I never got him 75 yards to the west using that axis. Never. Not one time. He was always using this one when he would come in and out of this particular section of the agriculture. And so fast forward to summer. Again, every time I'm in Illinois, I'm going out here. I'm changing camera locations. I'm putting them up. I'm lowering them down. I'm changing batteries. And so once every month or so, I never saw another human being in this area on camera at all. So again, my assumption that this part of the park was not pressured was being validated. I was not picking up people on my trail cameras at all. And again, trail cameras take a small, narrow snapshot of a much larger picture, but still, if I'm finding areas that deer are moving, other people could do so as well. They're just not, and I'm not picking them up. I didn't pick up anybody until October, late October, while I was in Kansas. So as the summer rolls on, I have located a few spots where I believe the deer are traversing a couple of these drainages, a couple of these saddles. I've got cameras. I'm picking up bucks. I'm watching my number one target explode. I mean, absolutely explode from what I believe to be a 150 class deer last year. I could be wrong. He could have been 140 something. He is massive, and he's, of course, in velvet, so he looks even bigger. He's wide, he's tall, he's got a kicker, his crab claws have gotten huge. He's just a giant deer. And I'm literally able to watch this deer grow up all summer because he's using this relatively same path of travel frequently. And then as we get closer to like August and September, he sort of has changed his pattern a little bit. Everything's grown up in there. It's much harder to walk. Every time I go in there, I'm absolutely destroyed by the stinging nettle. But I notice a what appears to be trail through the stinging nettle, up and down a few different saddles. And it doesn't look like it's a heavily used deer trail, but it is a deer trail. And I follow it, and I find a scrape. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm gonna put a camera on this scrape, and I'm gonna make the scrape even bigger. And so I did. And I still have a camera up there right now. This was the camera that killed this buck, in my opinion. This camera and my keeping a log. I put the camera up 10 foot high. I put it on the scrape. I opened up the scrape even bigger. I bent down a licking branch and I put something on it. I don't remember what I put on it. It was branch butter or something like that. And he hit that scrape. Not long after I created it, he was in that scrape. Now, this camera is not catching the deer travel path perfectly, but they are clipping the top right corner of the camera as they pass through there. Sometimes they'll hit the scrape, not every time, but they are, they're probably passing that scrape on the downwind side of it more than they're actually going into it, which a lot of people will say a mature buck doesn't always hit the scrape, but a mature buck will pass downwind of the scrape, get the sense that he needs, and move on with his day, not always hit it. But this buck, I have several pictures of him in the scrape, making a scrape, using the licking branch, he's in there with other bucks, and he's in there when he sheds velvet, and that's the point. He's in there with another 8, and that's the point at which I really got a full feel for how giant this buck was when he stood next to what I would call a typical nice 115-inch Michigan 8-point, like just what I would see all day long, which is, in my opinion, in Michigan is a shooter all day long. It's just what I see. That's what I'm used to seeing. That's a big buck comparatively. To see him stand next to a typical 8-inch, a typical 8-point, 115, 120-inch buck really illustrated the sheer size and mass of this deer comparatively. And I will continue to talk about how big his antlers are, but his body, he was probably 270 when I drug him out of there. I've got his teeth, and I'm going to have him aged. I am fascinated to figure out how old this deer was, but I'm just going to continuously refer to his antler size because it's the most, it's the sexiest thing that people talk about, is his antlers and how big they were. And anyway, he's in there routinely, in and out of the drainage, either hitting the scrape or passing downwind of the scrape. But from what I can tell, he passes through here when there is little to no wind at all. And the more I listen to people talk about thermals, the more I believe he preferred to move using thermal advantages as opposed to wind. And there was a lot of drainages in this particular area. And I think as the wind and the thermals are mixing and going in and out of these drainages and over top of the drainages and off of these points, it's probably a little squirrely in there and hard for him to get his bearings as far as security is concerned. But that being said, I knew the direction that he was going. It was just a matter of me being there at the right time. I felt like I could set up on the edge of that drainage and have my wind dump down into it, because he wasn't going down into it. He was working the edge of it. He was actually, typically, he would work off the point of a ridge and then work down into the other side of the drainage. And so, I knew how he was using this area. And so, again, it was just a matter of time for me to get in there. And I think the most frustrating part for me, there's two. I've never had to access a spot through corn. I have been watching most of these cornfields around Michigan. There's usually a buffer of like manageable grasses between the edge of the corn and the woods, and it seems like you could easily get into these places. But this particular farmer, he planted his damn corn right up to the edge of the fence. And so the only way for me, because I hunted 3 sits before I ended up shooting this buck in Illinois. And so my first time out there, it's morning, and I can't get through the corn without making a racket. There's just nothing I can do. I mean, the wind is in my favor. Everything's perfect. I know where I want to go. I get there just fine, but it's my half a mile walk. I have to follow. I basically have to get into the corn, and I have to walk in the row of corn from my truck to the woods. And I can't like deviate. Like, you can't just, it's not as the crow flies, it's as the corn grows. So probably 3/4 of a mile as the corn grows. And I decided to hunt my saddle because it was more narrow. And so I got my saddle and my sticks on my backpack and my bow like against my belly, my arms tucked in tight, and I'm trying to walk through the corn as slow as possible. And I feel like I did an okay job, but it is so loud. If you've ever tried to walk through corn, if there's deer in the corn, forget it, man. You're not sneaking up on anybody. And so I hunted that morning, and I saw a cheese dick. Cheese dick is what I refer to as like a spike or a fork. I saw a cheese dick and a couple does. Never saw any mature bucks. This is really early in October, actually. And I really thought my best bet was to get on him early. And it might have had I had a little more time. But that first morning was, I saw deer. That's great. The afternoon, I chose not to sit in the same spot. I sat over where I had seen him previously in that drainage where where I was saying that I was watching him explode into this massive buck. His particular access in and out of this ag field. He was historically there more frequently in the afternoons, evenings. And so I figured, well, I'll sit this morning over here by the drainage where he's on camera hitting the scrape. I'll sit the evening where he's been coming into the he's been coming into the woods from the ag field, and we'll see what happens. And I saw nothing. Totally fine. Again, I'm not butthurt. It's my first time hunting Illinois in this property. I don't think I'm going to see a buck the first time ever, but nonetheless, I sat there, saw nothing, and my night was over. So I went back, and I actually bought stuff this year to sleep in my car. Like, so that way I didn't have to spend money on a hotel. Like, I bought an inflatable mattress for the backseat of my truck. I bought this little inflatable pillow, whatever. I was sleeping in my truck, and I was trying to make it like I was really, like, I know it sounds like I manufactured some hardships, but I didn't want to pay for a hotel because I was there for work, but I was there the extra days for personal use, so I couldn't charge the company for that. So I would sleep in my truck, and I would just go back to the public parking areas at these state lands, and I would sleep in my truck. 4 out of 10 don't recommend that. It sucks, especially if it's cold. But next morning I woke up and I hunted. I didn't want to hunt the what did I do the next morning? Maybe I didn't hunt the next morning out there. I don't think I hunted the next morning out there. That's it. That was my first sit ever. I think I actually sat 4 times before I shot this buck. The next time I was in Illinois, I went and set up in the evening, so I couldn't hunt that morning. I actually drove out. Again, corn is up. I walked along the corner. Like, there's only one way. When the corn is up, there is only one way for me to get out there. And I realize that that's a problem. And so this will be my last set before this corn comes down. And I've already sort of made friends with that. But I try to sneak out in the afternoon. I get set up in a tree in sort of a flat. It's kind of like an oak flat, except it's not. So disregard that. It's a stinging nettle paradise is what it is. It's crazy. I've never seen this before. And I never knew that deer ate stinging nettle. But you could walk into these woods and it was crotch height stinging nettle as far as the eye could see. And the tops were just mowed completely off of all the stinging nettle. Like, the deer would just stand in there and browse. And so and there was tons of acorns. So I knew the deer were using this, but it was a matter of me being in the right place at the right time when the deer were coming through this particular area. And so there was an area that I had a camera. I was getting bucks on it in the beginning of summer. I went and sat up set up on that area and saw nothing. Again, whatever, no big deal. So my evening's over. I go back. I decide I'm not going to come back out here in the morning because I cannot get through this corn quietly. And I have a feeling if these deer are in this corn in the morning, I'm blowing them out of here before I ever have a chance to see them, because there's no way for me to get out here. And so the next morning I actually hunted somewhere totally different and saw nothing. And so those 4 hunts were, not necessarily a bust, because I think it was important for me to make friends with the fact that I cannot get through this corn quietly. And so I can't get out here and, efficiently or effectively hunt these mature deer until that corn is gone. And so I have a camera that's set up looking at a mock scrape that I made, but it actually picks up the corn as well. And so I knew that I was going to be able to see when the farmer cuts the corn based on that trail camera. And sure as shit, he cuts that corn when I'm in Kansas. And so my brother and I go to Kansas at the end of October. So we actually leave for Kansas October 29th. Adam and I are going to do a podcast about Kansas, but just waiting for him to find some time to come over here. So anyway, we're in Kansas, the upper Midwest. Those of you who live in this area know a cold front came through and snow came through, and holy fucking shit did the bucks get on their feet, and they were everywhere out there. And I was so that's one of those things where trail cameras can really burn you out, is when you are hunting somewhere where your cameras are not, and you can see that where your cameras are and you are not, the bucks are there. And so I've got all the big bucks on camera, like all of them. Even at our Michigan property, at this Illinois property, all the big bucks are on their feet and doing buck stuff when we were in Kansas. And so, but the good news is I was able to realize the corn is down. And so now it's a matter of me getting to Illinois to hunt this area. And when it coincided with work, I couldn't realistically come home from a week-long trip to Kansas and request of my family an opportunity to go spend more time in Illinois. So it had to coincide with a work trip. And that work trip was going to be on November the 14th. So I had been home for a whole entire week from Kansas, and I knew that I had to go to Davenport, Iowa for work, and was just going to, that was like an hour and a half from this particular property. And so I was just going to make it work. I was going to get up. I tried to have my mom come over and watch the kids on Monday the 13th of November so that I could get up super early and go out there. And I'm glad it didn't work. She could not watch the kids that morning. And I'm really glad that she couldn't, because I probably would have screwed this whole thing up. The buck that I shot, my number one target, had walked right by the area that I wanted to hunt at like 5:50. And I would imagine that since I know myself well enough, I would probably be dicking around in my stand at that same exact time. And so would he have cut my track? Maybe. Would he have caught me in the tree? Maybe. Would he have winded me? Sure, it's possible. But my trail camera told me that he went down into that drainage at 5:50 that morning, Monday, November the 13th. So 2 things. 1, I'm super glad I wasn't there fucking around in the tree and blowing that up, screwing it up. And number 2, I knew exactly where he went in the morning. And again, people will say, well, that's not fair, Chase, man. You got a camera out there. You know exactly what this deer is. Yeah, sure. Okay, fine. I do. But, what if I couldn't get there? What if he doesn't come out of the drainage that afternoon? I just know that he's been going down into that drainage and coming out of that drainage, pretty consistently. In the mornings, he's going in, and in the afternoon, he's coming out. And about a week, or maybe like 3 or 4 days previously, he had actually gone down into the drainage at like 7, so broad daylight, and come out at like 4:45, broad daylight. So I just thought to myself, well, the odds are in my favor that he's going to need to come out of there at some point. So I will leave when I can, and I will get there as fast as I can within the legal limits of the speed limit. And I will try to set up on this area and hope to catch him coming out of there. Again, my mom couldn't watch the kids, and my wife had yoga Monday morning, so I had to wait till that. I had to wait till she got home, and I knew that if I left immediately, it was going to be tight. I did. I was packed up, ready to go. She came home. I kissed everybody goodbye. I hit the road, and I had splendid traffic from here to my destination, and that doesn't always happen. And so the stars aligned. I hit the road. There was no backups on 80 in Indiana. There was no traffic in Illinois. I had a full tank of gas. I only had to stop one time. Everything worked out, you could say as it was intended, as it was supposed to. It was Monday, November 14th, and I arrived at my destination at 3:30. And stupid fucking time change makes it dark at like 5 something, like 5 and some change. So I knew that I had to hustle my little turd cutter out into the woods and get set up as quick as possible, because I was really probably only going to get an hour and a half sit. And that's fine. I knew what I had to do to get to where I had to be to make the most of it. And I really spent the duration of my drive visualizing myself getting from point A to point B. I visualized myself with this deer in my hands. I knew that my bow was on. I knew my equipment. I knew where I had to be. I knew how much time I was going to have. I expected this deer to behave a certain way. I just needed to see. I needed to visualize the end result. And so I did. I spent my 6.5 hour drive visualizing myself tracking this deer, holding this deer in my hands. So I arrive at 3:30. I throw my saddle on. I put my backpack on. My platform and my sticks are already on my bag. I had made a conscious decision that because I had very limited time and I was very focused on what I wanted to do, I was not going to self-film. And I don't regret that, not even for a minute. Not even for a fucking second. And there's probably people going, bullshit. I don't regret not setting my camera up and recording this. I was so laser focused on what I needed to do that I just wanted to do my hour and a half sit, quote unquote, old school. So I did not film anything. I did a little video in the tree of myself. I recorded a video of myself doing like an intro or like a little interview on the way there. And then post shot, I did some videos on my phone, but I did not record the whole kill. And so I knew I was only going to get an hour and a half. However, I was a little frustrated. You know, when you get there and you see that the sun is starting to set and the sky is going from a bright sunny day to like a little orangey like sunset, it's almost depressing. Like another day has passed and I didn't get to hunt and I didn't get to harvest this animal and it's not going to work, yada, yada, yada. You start, even though you were positive your whole ride and I'm chewing my fucking fingers and I'm eating my fingernails and I'm stressed out and I'm anxious, but I'm visualizing the positive. You get there and you're like, fuck it, it's not going to happen. It's too late. So I get my bike down and I put my bow on and I start pedaling through the cornfield and it ain't gonna fucking work. The bike's cool. Great. It's probably awesome for like a beat down trail that you can easily get down, but that motherfucker don't work and it plowed over cornfield. It just doesn't happen. So I literally jump off my bike and just dump it in the fucking field. And I'm like, I'll get it on the way in. And I hustled my little butt the rest of the way across that cornfield. And about 100 yards from my entrance, a doe came flying out of the woods. And then a second doe came jumping out into the cornfield. And then a third doe came hauling ass over the fucking barbed wire fence out into the cornfield. And I thought, son of a bitch, it's too late. It's too fucking late. I can't believe that I did all this and it's not going to fucking work. But I said, well, I'm most of the way there anyway, so we're still going to go set up. And I continued my walk towards the woods, and the doe saw me, and they hauled ass. And I got to the edge of the fucking woods where I wanted to where I wanted to climb that barbed wire fence, and there was one more deer down in that drainage getting ready to jump into the field. And it saw me. The deer saw me and hauled ass back down that drainage. And I thought to myself, that was probably him. And I couldn't see any antlers, but the fact that those deer came hauling ass out into that corn, those does, and there was one more deer 20 yards behind them, surely has me curious if that was him that day. But this deer ran back down into the drainage, and I hopped a barbed wire fence, and I traipsed on through the rustly leaves and worked my way over to the area that I wanted to set up. And I found a tree with a crotch that I could set up in, and it wasn't exactly perfect. But as I was able to set up, looking in the direction I wanted to look, being able to shoot the direction I wanted to shoot, but the wind was not doing what Onyx and the weather said it was going to do. It was slightly off. It was supposed to be a west wind, but it was a northwest wind. And I thought to myself, well, this could still work. I'm giving up a little bit here, but hopefully he will too, and he'll still travel with the wind slightly cutting his nose, and it will just magically work. Like, it wasn't the end of the world, but it wasn't fucking perfect. And I set up, and again, it's 3:45. I'm sweating. I'm literally in a t-shirt. I only wore my t-shirt that night, and I was soaking wet with sweat because of how fast I walked across that cornfield. And again, wind not favorable. That's okay. The sun starts to go down, and I ended up putting my jacket on. So now I'm not bare armed, letting my scent blow all over the place, but I'm probably not scent controlled to the max. I'm all set up. I got my headlamp on my head for when it gets dark. Like, I'm feeling good, but not expecting. I'm hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. And the worst being that I don't see anything. I don't ever expect that I'm going to see him and fuck it up. That wasn't what I was going to expect. My expectation was that I would not see anything. And so I let out a few grunt sequences, mainly just to cover my own noise. Like, I just rustled through the leaves getting out here and getting set up in the tree. And so I let out some grunt sequences and just sort of mimic maybe some deer chasing. Like, obviously there was just some does running around here. Why couldn't there be a buck chasing them? I don't know, man. It's just what I did. I think I let out one right after I was in the tree, and then I let out another one like at half an hour to 40 minutes later. And so now it's like 4:15, whatever. I'm just kind of chilling. My expectation is that the deer are going to come from in front of me or to my right. And that's kind of what I'm focused on. I am, periodically looking behind me. Behind me is where those does came from. And so I do keep checking that area. I'm also set up in a spot close to the furthest area I've ever explored out here. And I'm able to, from my vantage point in this particular saddle, the tree, I'm set up in my saddle. I'm able to really identify that the terrain does something that I didn't know it did. There's a little bit of a saddle between two ridges, and I didn't know it was there. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. That is a much more gradual entrance into the drainage than I had ever seen before. And I thought, I wonder if that is actually a preferred travel corridor as opposed to like the steep terrain changes. And just kind of put that in the back of my mind for maybe the morning. Because I was going to leave my shit set up and just come back in the morning and hunt the exact same tree. Just, again, because I had expected the worst. My expectation was I was going to see nothing because I came in there so late and fucking blew the doze out of there that it was going to be a pointless day. And then about 4:40, I heard the most attractive noise you could ever hear in the woods. When you're hunting a big buck, that is. That long stepping, toe dragging, big buck walking leaf rustle. And if anybody's ever heard a big buck walk through the woods, you know exactly what I just said. It's like they're too girthy or their balls are so big that they can't actually pick their legs up correctly to tippy toe through the fucking forest. Like their legs are so stiff with their legs are so rigid because they're so horned up that they can't walk normally. Like they just do this long stepping, toe dragging leaf like drag with as they move through the woods. And son of a bitch, I heard it. And it's behind me from that saddle. And I look around to my right. So I look behind me to my right and I can see a deer moving and I see antlers and they're big. And so I instantly grab my bow and he's probably 75 yards away at this point. Coming out of that fucking saddle. And sure, I mean, just as I suspected. And I turn around. Again, I don't see who this, I don't know who this is at this point, but I knew it was big antlers. And so I get out my rangefinder because I don't wear binoculars. I use my rangefinder and I can't find them. I can't find the deer in the rangefinder. And it's 440, 445, something like that. I think I shot him at 448, maybe. He is 75 yards behind me, and he's actually moving due west towards the ag field. So I don't know why, but I was so calm, and I was so cool, and I was so collected. I never panicked. I told myself, don't rush this shot. Let's figure out where he's going to be. Let's range him. Let's let him tell me where I need to be at, because Bret from like a month ago would have been dialed that bitch out to 75 and just let it fucking fly. But, you know, I shoulder shot that deer earlier in the year and I felt panicky, and I think I was just so calm, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's because I didn't have to mess with the camera. I don't know if I'll ever know what it was, but I do know that I told myself, don't rush this. Let him tell you where he wants to go. And as he proceeded west towards the ag field, I'll never be able to tell you why this happened either. He changed his direction of travel for some fucking reason and literally walked on a straight line north-northwest directly at me. I mean fucking directly straight at me. And again, I knew there was no way I could shoot him at this point. It would be a full frontal shot. I don't have a lot of confidence in that. I'm 2 sticks high, so the angle's not great. I'm too much of an angle to take that shot anyway. I don't know if he's going to walk straight underneath me. I have no clue what's happening at this point. I am turned all the way around backwards in my saddle. I've got my hand on my release with slight tension on the string, watching him, and I realize he's going to close this to where I don't even have to range him. He's going to get so close to me, He's either going to walk underneath me and I'm going to top pin him, or he's going to get close enough where I don't even have to think about it. But the trouble was there wasn't a lot of cover for me to draw back because he was walking straight at me. He got to about 22 yards, and I think he stopped on the track where I walked in. I truly believe that he caught my ground scent and stopped. And when he stopped, again, I swear to fuck, he looked straight at me, hanging backwards off of a fucking tree. And he put his head down, and he turned, and he walked west again. Perfectly fucking broadside. And as his face went behind a small tree, I drew back, and he stopped again for no fucking reason. And he was just looking west out into that ag field. And I had the absolutely most picture-perfect, unencumbered broadside shot that I could have ever imagined. He was so close, I didn't even have to range him. I put my top pin right in the center of his body, and I let her rip, and he never fucking moved. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't duck. He didn't lurch. He didn't twitch. He didn't do anything. He was so fucking calm that my arrow went straight through his lungs, through the backside. He kicked. He ran back the direction he came, approximately 100 yards. And again, it's 4:45. I can still see. He ran in 10 seconds. He ran to the top of the ridge, next to the one he walked in on, next to the saddle he walked in on. I could see him standing there in all the brush. I could see him flick his tail. And then, like I said, in 10 seconds, he tipped over dead. I'm not fucking kidding you. That deer walked right to me, stopped. I took out my rangefinder after I was done. He was 21 yards. My top pin is 20. That arrow went right through him. I could see my nocturnal knock lit up in the grass or in the leaves. I watched him run on top of the ridge. I watched him tip over. I heard him kick. I was so frustrated. And in the blink of a fucking eye, everything changed. And I knew that I just shot my number one target at 21 yards. And he was laying dead at the top of the ridge. And then it was so surreal. And I've never said something felt out of body. I didn't feel like it really just happened. I could not believe that I just sent an arrow through my number one target, a massive buck that just ran to the top of the ridge in eyesight and tipped over dead. In my wildest dreams. You can imagine that, but when it actually happens, I honestly felt like it wasn't fucking real. And I just put my arms up and I had a little conversation with myself like, holy shit, man, you just did it. You just did it. And like I said, I recorded a couple little outtakes there about shooting him. I texted my brother and my buddy Head. I texted my wife. Like, I just killed the Illinois Giant. I just killed the Illinois Giant. That son of a bitch came right out of that drainage at 4:45, just like he did a couple days prior. I did a lot of reflection on what happened that day. In my heart of hearts, I believe that he was chasing those does out of that drainage that day. I believe there was a hot doe in that 3 or 4 does. I believe he was the buck that I bumped back into the drainage as I entered the woods that day. I believe that I got to the property exactly when I was supposed to. I believe that I set up in a tree that I was supposed to set up. And I am not a religious person at all, but I believe in the power of visualization to the extent that what happens is you subconsciously make decisions that are going to affect the outcome of your scenario because of how positive you have visualized a certain event. So I visualized this happening so much, and I documented everything so hard. Like, I studied maps, and I made notes, and I dropped pins, and I created an activity log. Like, I planned this so positively that I think I just inadvertently and subconsciously made decisions on how to get from point A to point B, how to enter the woods, what tree I needed to set up in, the wind, how it would be moving. Like, that deer could have moved, if he would have moved 50 yards to the east, he'd have probably been downwind of me. Again, the wind was not perfect, but he didn't. The fact that he walked straight to me on a string and I was able to shoot him at 21 yards is mind-boggling to me. I believe in my heart of heart that I bumped that buck back down into the drainage, and he waited an hour till he felt comfortable and the woods quieted down. And he didn't come up the same way that he ran back down in. He came the other way around that drainage and up that saddle. And I think he was going to go back out to that ag field and look for some does. I truly believe that. But instead, he walked right to me. He could have gone anywhere in the woods that day. But I believe that I was in his home. I believe that that was his territory. He was clearly the monarch of this particular state land. There were no bucks bigger than him out there. There were bucks close, but nobody bigger. I believe I was in his living room, and he had no idea. And I think he sees so few people out there that getting, again, he could see a farmer and get bumped into the woods, because that's where he saw me, in the farm, in the cornfield. So I don't think seeing me in the cornfield was that startling. I don't think smelling my tracks in the woods was that startling. I don't think he smells human tracks in those woods that frequently. People were not going out there. I think I was in his living room, and he had no idea, and he wasn't nervous, which is why when he stopped at 21 yards and my bow went off and that arrow flew, he didn't move because he didn't know what was going on. He wasn't on high alert. I hunted an unpressured buck, an unpressured mature buck. I got in his fucking living room and I smoked him. And so I got down, collected my things. I went and found I went and found my arrow, and it was covered in blood. And I knew, I watched him drop. I heard him kick, and then it went silent, and it had been silent for 45 minutes or half an hour, whatever. But I stuck my arrow in the ground where it was, and I could see the luminoc, and I left the woods, and I called my brother. I had to talk to somebody. It's just such an insane feeling to shoot your target buck. So I called Adam, and I told him the story, and I walked to my truck, and I realized, oh man, it's gonna be a motherfucker getting this thing out of here, and that's okay. It was gonna be totally worth it. It was only 5 o'clock. It was like 5:15 when I got to my truck, so it was still very early in the day. I had previously met the neighbor. I went over and knocked on his door, told him, hey man, listen, I shot a nice deer tonight. I'm gonna be out in the woods for a while, so don't freak out if you see my lights, whatever, because that's why he introduced me the previous time, as he watched me walk through the corn with my headlamp on. And so anyway, I talked to Carl. It's all good. Told him what we were doing. I reached out to the landowner, and she gave me permission to drive my truck all the way back through the cornfield, which was an insane gift. I basically cut a half a mile off of my drag. So she's like, you can drive your truck wherever you want. So I drove my truck all the way back to the edge of the woods. I think I finally started tracking again at like 5:45, 6 o'clock, something like that. So it had been an hour since I shot him. He had been dead for an hour. I mean, like I said, he died in 10 seconds. He did not bleed like I thought. Like the blood trail was fine. I still found him in like 15 minutes. Once I got back out there and I was down on the ground, man, it's a little disorienting in the dark by yourself. Like I watched from my tree, I watched him run, and I went to the arrow and I stood there and I looked around in the dark with my headlamp on. I'm like, I don't know where I'm at, man. This is a little bizarre. So I did have the blood trail. I had my deer cart, so that's nice. I tracked him. And so what I think happened is I think I hit him, double lunged him high. And so he didn't bleed. Like if you double lung a buck low, and he starts filling up with blood, he's going to be squirting out. But when you double lung them high, he's going to fill up with blood, but it's going to take a little while to fill up with blood. And I don't think he was bleeding until he was bounding. So like every time he'd hit the ground after a bound, blood would squirt out, but it wasn't like crazy. And so I was a little concerned about that. I'm not going to lie. Anyway, 20 minutes later, I find him. He's just up on the top of the ridge, just like I thought, laying there. And like I said, he died within 10 seconds. And that walk up, man, I've never walked up on a real, truly big buck before. Like I've walked up on what I think is a big buck. And a big buck to me, the biggest buck I ever shot was a 118-inch busted up 10 from Clarkston here in Michigan. And that's a great deer. And I'd shoot that deer over and over and over again. But to walk up on a 160-inch buck is mind-boggling, especially when he is your number one target. And you don't really know if you're good enough to hunt a mature deer. And then when you finally do, and you finally connect, and you can get to walk up on him, it is so emotional. And I'm emotional anyway, because after I screwed my eye up and I had to learn how to hunt left-handed, and I've been doing all this stuff, and I'm by myself, and it's just like, you screw up a shot earlier in the year, and then you always second guess yourself. But to walk up on that deer, and just his body was massive. It's almost like it's just it seems unreal. He doesn't even look real. Like you've never seen an animal that big up close. I've never seen a white-tailed deer that large up close in my life. I've told people that. I've told people before, I couldn't score a deer on the hoof because I've never seen a big deer on the hoof. Now I have. And then when you see it, it just is hard to even put into words. And so I'm by myself in the middle of this state land in the pitch black, and I know there's coyotes out here, and that bothers me. I know there's bobcats out there, and that bothers me too. But I needed to sit with him for a while. I just sat there. I told everybody that I found him so that everybody could relax because there was a concern that I wouldn't. I just talked to him like he could understand me. I told him how honored I was to be in his presence, and how fortunate and honored I was to be able to hunt a majestic animal like him, and how I appreciate how mature he was, and I probably apologized to him. I don't know, but for about a half an hour, I just sat there, and I'd put my hand on his head, and I'd put my hand on his shoulder, and I held his hoof, and I looked at it, and I would just touch his arm, and it's just he was so humongous and so majestic that I almost didn't want it to end. Like I didn't want to stop that experience. Like I just put the lights on him, and I just sat there with him, and we just had our moment. And I thanked him for everything. I told him how he would feed my family, and how honored I was to be in his presence, and that I believe I probably apologized. Whatever. That is what it is. Super lame. Sure. Whatever. Laugh at me. I don't care. But I probably apologized. And so it was time. I mean, it was time for me to do what I had to do. And I got him on the deer cart after I cleaned him up, and I had a pretty long drag. There's a lot of fallen trees out in that state park, which I never really paid attention to. You don't really notice how many trees have fallen until you got to drag a 270-pound deer out of the woods by yourself in a deer cart in the dark. Put that on a business card. I drug him out. It was a mile drag to the far, because I didn't want to try to get him over top of a barbed wire fence, so I had to take him to the only opening in the fence I knew of, and that was in the far back corner. It was a 1.1 mile drag. Thank God I had the deer cart. And a lot of people would say, why didn't you quarter him up, Bret? Because I didn't want to fuck it up. I was afraid I was going to screw up his hide. He's so beautiful. I couldn't fathom screwing up his hide. This deer deserves to be memorialized for eternity. And all I could imagine was me fucking up his hide. And I couldn't do it. So I put him on the deer cart, and I drug his ass out. Got him to the corner of the field, or the corner of the cornfield, backed my truck over there. And I thought, well, now I have to process this deer. And I was going to quarter him up, but I didn't want to screw it up. So I found a deer processor nearby, and I took him there in the morning. But I got him in the truck, and I went and checked into a hotel, and the rest is history. I mean, I dropped him off at the processor in the morning. They caped him out for me, and then brought the skull cap home and dropped a hide off at the taxidermist here in town, and I still have the antlers with me. And I have this thing called a raculator. And, I've seen people talk about the inconsistencies with scoring on a raculator, and whatever, it is what it is. I scored him with the raculator at 167 and 5/8, knew there was probably some error there. So I bought some trophy tape with Wild Game Innovations, and I taped him out today, and he's actually 162 and 3/8. I feel like that's probably more accurate. So I taped him out 162 and 3/8, biggest deer I've ever shot in my motherfucking life. And I am so in love. I've held him up to all the other antlers that I have in the basement. It is hilarious on what I had previously thought was a big buck. All bucks I'm proud of, but this one in particular has really set a standard for what I want to do hunting mature deer. I also have his teeth. I'm going to have him aged. And that, friends, is the story of the Illinois Giant. I hope you enjoyed my story. It is something I can almost hardly believe, but I'm so thankful and fortunate to be able to chase whitetails, and especially big mature monarchs like this. He is, man, I may never see a deer of that caliber again in my life, but I'm going to fucking try. He has lit a fire under me. Actually, the buck last year from Illinois really lit a fire under me on finding mature deer. So I'm going to keep hunting these mature animals, and no matter what it takes, I'm going to try to get on them. So again, thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate y'all. Talk to you later. Bye.
Hello, hello, hello. What do you know? I love a camel toe. Everybody knows that's just how it goes when you're testing the levels. You gotta sing. Everybody knows that you gotta sing when you're adjusting your knobs, 'cause your kid knocked your mixer on the floor one day.